Hello, I'm going to show you how to explicate a poem. And before doing so, I hope that you have looked at Goodwill Thrift Store Missoula and watched the video and heard Cheryl Nothey read the poem. So if you haven't done that, pause this and listen to her read the poem. It's really important you do that first. Okay, so you've heard her read the poem, and if we go back here, we can also scroll down a little bit and click on Show More, and you're able to see the entirety of the poem. So this is linked in the weekly overview, and it describes how to explicate a poem, which is also you can find in the readings folder. And it's really great. It's short, and this gives a very kind of numbered approach. I don't really particular care if you do things out of order. The only thing I really care about is an explication should have a general comment at the top that gives us basic information and a general interpretation of what you think the poem means. And then the next sort of the body of it is where you go through the poem very closely and read it image for image and line for line, if you will. In a short definition would be an explication is a close reading of text. So that means that unlike plays and short fiction, poems are shorter, and oftentimes they have a way of having a lot of multiple meanings, and they have a way of blooming where they might seem a little confusing at the beginning, but with repeated readings, they have a way of revealing themselves to you. And I know that sounds perhaps a little, I don't know, cosmic or supernatural, but it really isn't. It's one of the beauties of poetry is that it can mean something on a first read, and then it can have more in-depth reading with repeated readings, and that is highlighted here. So, like I said, I'm not going to go over all of these different steps, but I'm going to give you an example of what it's like to explicate a poem with Goodwill Thrift Store Missoula by Cheryl Nothey. So I'm going to save what I put at the top until I've kind of really investigated the poem, because I really won't know what that is until I'm done. But spoiler alert, if I were doing this and I was explicating it, I might start with Goodwill Thrift Store Missoula by Cheryl Nothey is a poem that is about a woman who goes into a thrift store, and different items in the thrift store bring about deep thoughts for her. I mean, it's that simple. Now, by the time I finish investigating the poem, that sort of general overview of what it is might deepen, and I may go back to that beginning phrase and enhance it. So I just kind of leave it there and move on. And now I'm going to do a close reading of the text. So that means I'm going to let me examine the words. And one of the things about reading a poem is it's always a good idea to read for the end of a sentence, not how the poem is laid out. Don't read for line breaks, or it will sound really halting and confusing. Poets use line breaks for rhythm and rhyme or for a visual scheme, not necessarily for meaning. So, for example, if you read it like this, it's hard to hate. Anybody when we're. All may be trying. It doesn't sound right. It sounds confusing and odd. So it's better to read for punctuation. And if I scroll down a little bit, there's a period right there. So I'm going to read this like it's a sentence. It's hard to hate anybody when we're all maybe trying on the shoes of the dead together, trying on their slacks and reading their books. That seems to make more sense. Now, it's still kind of a loaded sentence there, and it kind of starts off pretty deep, in my opinion anyway. in that in this space of a Goodwill store, um, I think what she's trying to say is it's a great equalizer, and it takes away sort of our preoccupation with hating each other when we're all there for a common cause. And it's the great equalizer of being there, so we're too busy seeing what's in common with each other to hate each other. So it kind of brings to mind what I'm thinking about, where I always, when I go to Goodwill, I always see such a diverse array of people there. I see people who are wealthy. I see people who give the appearance that they're not wealthy. I see diverse people. I see people of color. I see people who give the appearance of a variety of LGBTQ stuff. Like, it's just really diverse, and it's one of the things I think is pretty cool about thrifting. Anyway, moving on. So we are gentle to each other when we reach for the same glass or the same blanket. So that makes me ask, why are they gentle? And it's this idea of the dead. And it seems like this is a solemn place, that oftentimes the objects and the clothing that are in Goodwill are bequeathed after someone passes. So there's a kind of solemnity or seriousness or sacredness to the space that makes us, that we're gentle to each other when we reach for the same glass or the same blanket. So here, that might mean, in the very literal sense, there you are, you're reaching for a glass to see how much it costs, to see the label, and someone reaches at the same time. And in this setting, you're kind to each other, you're gentle. You're not like, I saw that first, like you're nicer in there because of this solemnness and seriousness of the space, or the spiritual nature of the space, if you will. Smile when we collide between the broken couch and a stain on the sheet. So that brings us into, it's a similar repetitive structure of that we're nice when we're seeing these things that are kind of beat up a little bit. There's the common thread I see between broken couch and stain on the sheet is these are imperfect items. And I don't really know what to do with that at this point, so I'm just going to leave it alone, but that I do understand. And that's an important skill with doing poetry, or any kind of interpretive intellectual inquiry or critical thinking, is you can build on positivity if you say, all right, this poem confuses me, but what do I understand? And in my case, I can see the commonality between a broken couch and a stain on the sheet, and that they're flawed objects. What they mean in the big picture of things, I don't know yet. So I just put a pin there and go, maybe I'll come back to that and it will all make sense later. Anyway, we pass. Now, here's one thing that's odd is this comma, and I can't figure it out because it seems like it should not have a comma. We pass cool ghosts. But anyway, I'm just going to read it all the way to the period and see how it sounds. We pass cool ghosts who feel the sleeves of jackets, the hems of dresses, and hold nylon stockings up to the light. Now things are getting kind of unreal for me. Everything up until this point seemed like it was part of the real world. And now I'm getting this whiff of the supernatural, where it says, we pass cool ghosts who feel the sleeves of jackets, the hems of dresses, and hold nylon stockings up to the light. So with that comma there, it's not like I can say we pass the cool ghosts. Like there's us who are corporal and alive, and there are ghosts. Now I'm guessing with this comma here is we're the cool ghosts. Like right now we're cool ghosts. We're not hot ghosts. We're not dead yet, so we're just on the before death. But we will be ghosts at some point. So we're cool ghosts. We're not fevered from the onset of death. I don't know. I'm doing the best I can here, but we pass, and it's us, because it seems logical that people would feel sleeves of jackets, hems of dresses, and if they're going to buy the nylons, they'll hold them up and see if there are tears in them or something. So now we're kind of in commune with the dead. And that makes sense when we're trying on the shoes of the dead together. All right. And an old man tries on a dead soldier's coat. So now it's getting specific. Now we're in a movie back to reality of a live person trying on a dead soldier's coat. It weighs him down. He bends as though he were carrying the man on his back. So this is like a gorgeous little combination of ideas and somewhat heartbreaking, where this idea that we're all connected and that generationally we take on the burdens of the people who came before us. And so it's the idea of a soldier's coat and that it weighed him down. He bends as though he were carrying the man on his back, as though he's carrying the corpse of the dead man inside the coat. And it might mean something that has to do with we carry the dead with us all the time and their burdens and their joys. That is part of our living life, is recognizing the dead. When he opens up his narrow pocketbook, a moth flies up. Now, this is peculiar. So I'm assuming he is the old man. And when he opens up his narrow pocketbook, a moth flies up. And that always seems to me to indicate poverty, that there's no money in it. There's just a moth and it's moth eaten. It's like old and poor. It's kind of odd to see the word pocketbook attributed with a man, but maybe that's like an archaic use of the word pocketbook instead of a wallet. So I'm going to pin that. We find blouses for our mothers we never sent. So now things are getting not real, but a little surreal. Unless, I used to use a consignment place and I would find the things that I was consigning when I'd go and I'd kind of go in there and hunt around and shop. I would see the stuff that I had put in there. But this is more like perhaps the person who's in the consignment store or whatever is reflecting on things that they would have given to a thrift store. And it makes them sentimental and maybe even a little guilty because they didn't, this could be symbolic of a gesture that was never made, and they feel guilty that they didn't show this gesture of a gift or a token of love, that they didn't follow through with. We found blouses for our mothers we never sent, a past we never knew. So it's almost like alternative universe, that if in my past I had been more kind and thoughtful, I would have sent that blouse, but I wasn't. This is a past I'll never know because I didn't do what I should have done in the past. So being in this thrift store is really triggering a lot of emotional and psychological triggers. White bowls that fit inside each other, someone else's babies. So when you look, that can be literal, like you're in a thrift store, this is something you would see. And then you think, someone else's babies, that's kind of odd because bowls aren't babies, but they are kind of gathered all together. It is plural, so I think they're connected. Could it mean that these are, that these bowls were picked out by someone and they thought they were beautiful or practical and terrific and they have sentimental attachments to them, but now they're in a thrift store and they're detached from that kind of beauty from which they were originally used, and we know that there's someone else's babies. There's something that someone else loved. Painstakingly embroidered pillowcases, empty jars, proof of happier lives. So all of this could be where the thing that establishes the list is a past we never knew, and then we have a list of a series of things, and they're proof of happier lives, that inside the thrift store they're kind of sad and without meaning, but they were in their original usage in kind of the flow of life, if you will, in someone's home. Then we have a break. So the whole poem is told in two stanzas. So that's something I'd put at the beginning. The poem is told in two stanzas. And now it goes from this use of we, the first person plural, to I. So now it's a narrative, and now it's first person, and now we have a story. When I walk past the rack of dark wool suits, I smell a human musk like an animal would. Okay? So that's pretty literal. I don't know that there's anything deep about that, except maybe this idea of the animal that she's her senses are heightened, that she's in an incredibly sensitive state when she walks by the dark wool suits. I get a sense of a man, of my long dead grandfather, and I'm filled with love for the suits. So I'll stop there. So now she's remembering her grandfather, who's been long dead, and it's making her sentimental. And she's attributing the love that maybe she had for her grandfather to the suits. The suits are triggering this love. Love for the man holding the double boiler. So now this is her grandfather, and she's remembering him holding the double boiler, at least in my opinion, although it could be someone else in the thrift store. So I'd have to entertain both of those potential interpretations. But let me stick with the grandfather, that it's still the grandfather. Maybe you don't know what double boiler is, and what I would do is have a tab open and just throw that in there in case there's any vocabulary that you don't know. So a double boiler, when I think of it, when I was a kid, my grandmother used to make, see there's chocolate here in a double boiler? She used to make hot chocolate in a double boiler because the water would be in the bottom and the milk and the chocolate would be in the top. So maybe in this setting, the grandfather is making chocolate milk, and that would be a sentimental memory that this woman is having. A love for a teenage girl with bare feet, sucking the ends of her hair and watching the clock. So this is kind of a loaded image. So if I picture this movie of the grandfather making hot chocolate for his teenage girl, she's the granddaughter, and she has bare feet and she's sucking the ends of her hair and watching the clock. So that tells me like maybe she's not appreciating what the grandfather is doing for her right now because she's watching the clock like, oh my God, can he just be like over with this so I can get on my socials? She's like her hair, and she might be insecure. It's a nervous thing to do, sucking your hair, that she's at the awkward teenage stage. And then it says, love for the lonesome one that the shoes will surely fit. So who is the lonesome one that the shoes will surely fit? And that makes me go back to the top where it talks about shoes. It's hard to hate anyone, where we're all maybe trying on the shoes of the dead together. So that's an echo. And had I not read the whole poem and been patient, I wouldn't have seen that shoes is mentioned twice. So maybe by going through, she sees someone in the thrift store after she's gone through this emotional memory of her grandfather, and maybe a little guilt and sentiment, that when she sees someone who might be lonely and she sees the shoes, that maybe eventually someone will get usage out of them and there will be kindness in the world. I don't know. Or maybe it's about her, that she's lonesome. But if we look at the whole poem now, it seems like now I have a deeper understanding of the poem by reading it and truly investigating it. And maybe that is what I will write about at the beginning and say, the poem Goodwill Thrift Store, Missoula by Cheryl Nothey is a 2-stanza free verse poem that examines how, when we are in a thrift store, it can provide communion between strangers that have shared memories and shared connections with both the living and the dead. Period. Now, that's a lot deeper than what I first started out with, and it seems appropriate, if I do say so myself. The other thing is, I was able to say it was free verse by looking at the last syllable of every line, and clearly they are not rhyming. And this is just written completely in free verse. I forgot to mention that. So that's my wicked smart way of doing an explication.